Hello and welcome to another edition of Very British Futures, the podcast about UK television science fiction. Although today's subject has quite a bit of Germanic input too. Before we go on, I feel I should admit that this recording had a few technical hitches, so I apologise if you hear the odd digital flutter in our voices. We're travelling back to the 70s today, where thanks to 2001 and Star Trek, science fiction in popular culture seemed to be maturing and catching up with its literature. But elsewhere, it seemed to be still locked in 60s pulp nonsense. When I told friends we were going to be covering Star Maidens, it raised a few eyebrows. It's a series with a poor reputation, especially amongst people who've never seen it. Can we get beyond that title and its premise to find anything more worthwhile? I'm very glad to welcome back two friends to help me find out, Dr. Rebecca Ray and Kevin Hiley. Rebecca is a mental health mentor and a lecturer in psychology, whose research interests include gender and feminism. Kevin is a video editor and graphic designer who's worked on all kinds of productions over the years, from TV shopping to historical documentaries and beyond. How are you both today?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not so bad.
Star Maidens was a 13-part British-German co-production, which was broadcast in some ITV regions in 1976. The concept was initially proposed by Count Jost Graf von Hardenberg and his wife, and was developed by Eric Pace for Portman Productions. Pace's previous major science fiction series was the Pathfinders from Space trilogy, which we covered in our very first episode. He'd also had a busy career since then, writing for everything from The Avengers to Dixon of Dock Green. 5 episodes were written by the prolific Ian Stewart Black, another veteran of the ITC factory, 2 by John Lucarotti, and 2 by Otto Strang. At a time when the British film industry was in the doldrums, commercial television was attracting a lot of names behind the scenes, and Star Maiden benefits from 5 episodes directed by Freddie Francis. How would you sum up the plot of Star Maidens, Rebecca?
Okay, well, the planet Medusa has been roaming through space for generations after being knocked out of its orbit of Proxima Centauri by a comet, and it's travelling around the galaxy. By the 1970s, Medusa has reached our solar system, and Medusa is a matriarchal society where women rule and hold all the positions of power, while men are given menial positions such as domestic duties, childcare, and mechanics. When domestic Adam and mechanic Shem hear about Earth being ruled by men, they steal a space yacht and escape to Earth. They are pursued by Adam's mistress Flavia and head of security Octavia. Somewhere along the way, Octavia takes 2 British scientists, Dr. Liz Becker and Dr. Rudi Schmidt, hostage back to Medusa. From this point on, the series starts to shift focus between the 2 locations and 2 sets of characters. So half the show is set on Earth, following them trying to get Adam and Shem back to Medusa, and Flavia stays there, and then the other half is following Liz Becker and Rudi Schmidt having to integrate into Medusan society and rebelling.
The theme about a planet ruled by women is it's something that occurs fairly regularly in TV science fiction. Most long-running series seem to have done the planet ruled by women at some time or another. Star Trek, Blake 7, and Space 1999. And Doctor Who, interestingly, nearly came to do it twice, and both times the stories were nixed. Probably we dodged a bullet there. They would have been...
Mission to Magnus was, well, I've heard the big finish, and oh dear.
It's hard work. And I don't know if you've heard Prison in Space, but
yes.
I think that's another one we'd find pretty hard going. And in fact, well, they found it hard going back then. That's why they didn't make it. Interestingly, gender politics is something that has featured in science fiction really from the beginning, amongst some of the more interesting books. We've got the Disappearance by Philip Wiley, also author of When Worlds Collide. In that, men and women are separated and put onto two parallel Earths, and the book follows what happens to the two civilizations. Venus Plus X by Theodore Sturgeon, and The Power by Naomi Alderman, which is being turned into a television series. I don't know if you've heard of any of those.
No, I mean, it does come up in a few. I find it tends to come up as a theme in like anthology-based shows. Like the Sliders did 2 episodes on the theme of female dominant societies. One because it was more along this lines, and the other one was more because something like a virus or something wiped out most of the men.
That was just the Sliders plot. I mean, women are in charge not because of some shifting in the social dynamic, just simply because it's nearly all women that are left alive.
Yeah. And the other one was where the women got fed up with the men going to war and overthrew them. And when I've seen it in other shows, it's been like used for comedy value, like Futurama.
Oh yeah, Futurama.
One particular sci-fi sketch I remember is The Worm That Turned on the Two Ronnies, which was supposed to be set in the future where women have taken over.
Oh, I've heard of that.
I don't know if that was made in response to something like Star Maidens.
It's interesting. I did think about The Worm That Turned, whereas The Two Ronnies, it's very much a comedy idea. Although you could argue it's a reaction. Each episode started with saying that somehow this began when Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister. So it was in some ways possibly a reaction to that. One of the problems I found watching this series, should say, I think all 3 of us have only recently watched this series for the first time. I certainly didn't catch this on its first showing. I don't think it was shown in the Granada area.
I certainly didn't see it until it's about getting on for 10 years ago. I think I first caught it, and I think it was because someone put it on YouTube, and I was curious.
And I saw episode 1 about 5 years ago because a friend mentioned it, but they only knew about it because of an SFX article, and they thought it'd be funny, but I decided to give it a rewatch. And I'm glad I stuck with it beyond the first episode.
Definitely. The first episode, it's not a great advert for the whole series, really. It's definitely it's a series I feel that, whether it's a touch of Stockholm syndrome by the time you get into the last few episodes, but some of the last few are becoming, if not good, then at least sort of competent, reasonably well constructed.
I found with the show, after a while, I started preferring the episodes set on Medusa because it started getting a bit away from, I guess, the main story arc and just seeming a bit more episodic with random events each week on Medusa, like sentient robots and murders and environmental catastrophes on the planet's surface and stuff like that. Just random plots each week, and that just seemed more interesting.
Well, I think the problem you've got there is on Medusa, you've got plenty of scope for a good sci-fi idea to creep in. Back on Earth, it just gravitate towards being a sitcom and just sort of crazy antics with the main characters, and it does feel really rather schizophrenic at times.
Yes.
And I think the problem you've got with Star Maidens with this basing the whole premise around this idea of a planet dominated by powerful men meeting a planet dominated by powerful women is you're in risk of having a one-trick pony in terms of what to do with the story. And I think Star Maidens is actually at its best when it puts that aside to some degree and actually tells a sci-fi tale. Gives us an adventure for the week, because actually the stuff where they're sort of discussing the differences in their societies are often where it's at its most cringy, actually.
Yeah, it's most interesting when they're having to deal with a problem like the surface of Medusa collapsing and stuff, and then Octavia gradually, begrudgingly starting to see Rudi differently. And
well, that's it. I mean, because when you're dealing with a story like that, or the one where like there's just this long buried sentient AI and things like that, you could have put that in something like Space 1999, and you wouldn't blink, that kind of plot.
No.
Yeah, strangely, that is when Star Maidens is working best.
The whole fish out of water comedy, which unfortunately just isn't very funny. And this, in fact, the whole series has got a problem of watching it, of knowing what it wants to be, which reading that SFX article that you mentioned, Rebecca, I was reading, was apparently a reflection of what was going on behind the scenes, that the British company came into it and bought it, seeing it as basically a comedy science fiction series, whereas the German partners saw it as a much more conventional Space 1999 style sci-fi series.
Yeah, and the two halves as well, the Earth stuff and the Medusa stuff, also filmed separately. Gareth Thomas mentions it in his interview on the DVD, saying in order to save on time, they had all the location stuff filmed at the exact same time as all the stuff going on Medusa, so he didn't meet half the cast as a result. So it does, I think it does come across in how disjointed it is. And yes, it does come out with some really odd humour that doesn't really work, or is quite cringy, like Shem's comment at one point saying, you have to be careful with female weapons because they're temperamental. And that was just really painful. And it just didn't fit.
Having a program centered around sort of interstellar gender politics being made almost entirely by men.
Yeah.
Written by men, produced by men, directed by men, filmed by men. One wonders what Star Maidens might have been like had, say, the writers been women. It might have quite drastically shifted the dynamic of the show. I
think it might have become a bit more about both men and women slowly understanding each other and coming together. I mean, this is part of what I would love to know with the Jos von Hardenberg, who came up with the idea, what his intention was. Did he see this as a comedy or a satire, or did he see it as an original sci-fi idea that hadn't been done before, which is possible. People who don't watch a lot of science fiction do think of things and think, oh, that's really original and no one's ever done it. And usually sci-fi fans can immediately reel off 5 or 6 examples of whatever it is they've thought of. And because of that, because we don't know in a way how it set off what it was going to be, it's a bit hard to judge a lot of the dialogue. Because is it trying to be funny, or do they mean things seriously?
I find that question hard to answer, because there are definitely scenes where they are playing it for laughs, or at least if not outright for laughs. They're being light-hearted about it. But yeah, there are definitely scenes I think we're supposed to take seriously, and I think most of those do take place on Medusa. Yeah,
I was thinking on Medusa, you're seeing more of this characters coming to an understanding between each other, whereas on Earth that never happens. It always descends into running away and running away.
They bring Graham Crowden into it in about episode 3, and oh dear. If Graham Crowden comes into something, you expect it to be funny.
That's true. He's
even though his character isn't actually particularly funny. It's just a pompous politician.
He is. It's just Graham Crowden's that style. I think his kind of default style is to go quite sort of larger than life, try and find the humour in it.
Yes, I actually get that sense actually that it could be that it's not just behind the scenes, but also, so I think some of the actors, especially on the British location filming, they're looking for the humour. They're looking for ways to play that side of it up.
In some ways, it's quite. I feel a bit sorry for the sort of German and French actors involved, because in the version that we're watching, most of them were dubbed, but so it's a bit hard to judge how good their performances are.
Yeah, that's really quite distracting at times, the redub.
It does sort of flatten out some of the characters, unfortunately. I don't think it's a surprise, really, that out of the German actors, it's Christian Kruger who plays Octavia, the security chief, who probably comes out the best from the German side of the acting, because she doesn't need to be dubbed. Her English is good enough that she can use her own voice.
Yeah, and she's actually probably one of the most effective characters in it, actually.
Yeah,
when she's used well by the writers, anyway.
Yeah, there was one episode where she went a bit weird, like she was an obsessing over Liz and who she fancied, and it was like, what is going on? She's behaving like a stalker.
It made up that was all the weirder simply because for the episode beforehand and the last couple of episodes, in fact, she pretty much said she didn't care about men. She's not interested. So why she should suddenly be fascinated by Liz's preferences? Just very peculiar.
I think one of the big issues for me of the show was, I don't know how to describe it, but the editing is very odd. You don't really get a good, clear sense of the passage of time. Like there's an episode where it feels like Adam's here, there, and everywhere. Like 1 minute he's in the lab, 1 minute he's in a hotel or on the ship, and you're like, is he super fast? Are they all in a field next to each other? And as for what's going on Medusa, I mean, Kevin was saying, months have passed or something. I'm like, what? Months have passed? You got no sense of scale at all in how much time is passing in the show. I don't know what the editing trick is for that, but you don't feel any sense of time passing. You just feel like it's all happening in one day.
I don't think it's so much an editing. It's more to do with the writing. And since it devolves for most of the show into sort of adventure of the week, I don't think they're keeping track of things like that very much. But yes, you're supposed to believe all this time has passed by, and really, by the time you come to the end of the series, you don't feel like it's been more than a couple of weeks, really.
It does feel I agree, it does feel quite quick. And I think there's a general sense that there isn't a strong hand at the tiller, basically.
No.
On this show, there's no, like I say, there's no real consistency. A good example is the abilities of Medusian men. In some episodes early on, they have that sort of Superman thing that when they're on Earth, suddenly they can take giant leaps. And but then that seems to be forgotten about. And then later on in the episode Hideout, Shem suddenly he's zapping people with flashes of light at one point, which again is then dropped and never mentioned again. And that permeates through the whole series. There's a sense that no one's really thought anything particularly through, and which is a shame, really, because occasionally something happens, or in some ways things happen almost accidentally. You say the good things that happen, and it's probably weird just reading stuff in. For example, about artificial intelligence, because about midway through the series, Rudi destroys one of the sentry robots that have been guarding the men as they slave away on the surface. And Octavia accuses him of murder. She sort of says, it's a robot. And he sort of says, does it have feelings? And she doesn't quite answer it. But it sort of sets up this idea that maybe they do have sentient AIs in these robots, and in the predictive computer that they use. And then it seems to get confirmed a few stories later in the one of the strongest episodes, Creatures of the Mind, when we have a whole load of abandoned computers, all with their own artificial intelligences, locked away in this basement and trying to reach out. In fact, it had me sort of thinking that in the final episode, the enemy, which is just referred to as the enemy, was going to turn out to be a rogue AI.
I was getting that sense watching that episode as well, that this was a robotic enemy and may actually turn out to be something like a spurned artificial intelligence, or whatever they would have called it in the 70s.
I did feel like the show didn't wrap up at the end. It felt like it was getting interesting and that they were getting ready for another season, but there seems to be conflicts on whether there was any thought on whether there was going to be a second season. Because I've seen some articles saying mistakenly that Rudi and Liz go back to Earth, and they don't.
No.
They stay on the ship with Octavia and go back to Medusa at the end. And Shem and Flavia and Adam go back to Medusa as well. You get the sense that they're gearing up for a fight against the enemy. And we also think that maybe it was setting up a love triangle between Octavia, Liz and Rudi, because Octavia seems to be taking a liking to Rudi, didn't she?
Yeah, it does seem to be. I mean, that's the way, if I was planning it, I think that's the way it would go. But to be honest, I don't think anyone was thinking that deeply about it. I think it seems like they were just kind of working from week to week.
That's what Gareth Thomas said in his interview. He said he took it episode by episode and didn't think about it deeply at all. But he said there was no suggestion of a second season when they started the show. And he said he never heard of anything the entire time, but he didn't really think about anything beyond the work he was doing at that time.
Yeah, it sounds like if there was a single person sort of directing the way the plot should go, they weren't listened to. But otherwise, as you said, there isn't really a hand on the tiller. There's definitely no series Bible being accessed by the writers. They barely seem to even know what happened before or after, in terms of continuity.
Oh, yeah, because we were commenting on the appearance, because in the first episode, you got Shem and Adam and I think some other men, and they've all got a streak of, blonde or white in their hair, a stripe. And then later episodes of Medusa, none of the men have this stripe in their hair, and it's like, oh, okay, they just forgot all about that appearance thing then.
It would not surprise me. And I suppose the fact that they were filming it in this way, with one set of stories being made in the studio and the other ones largely on location, that it might well be that there wasn't that much, in a way, communication between different parts of it, different teams. Plus, they had the literal communication problems in that some of the German crew didn't speak English, and of course not many English crew spoke German.
Well, there were French cast members as well.
It doesn't sound like it helps cohesion on location. So it does sound like a lot of rogue operators almost. They're just getting it done week by week rather than stopping and thinking about what sort of story they're telling.
And that, again, is compounded by the way it was distributed as well, because it wasn't shown nationally. It wasn't sold to ITV on a national basis, but shown piecemeal, aired at different times of the year in different places. Like Wales got it last, apparently.
Again, people probably weren't quite sure. Was it was it a kids show? Was it aimed more at an older adult audience? It's a bit hard to define in some ways.
I think there's also the problem of who is it aimed at anyway, in that, especially in the 70s, not only is this all being written by men, all the sci-fi, but nearly all the sci-fi authors writing television are male. And there's also the perspective of a time that sci-fi is only being consumed by males, adolescent ones usually. And I'm not. Was there an attempt with this show thinking that it might appeal to women or to girls or something? Because again, that's probably another one of the reasons the show kind of languished, is that they're aiming for an audience they have in the past pretty much always shunned.
I think they were largely aiming at a sort of traditional sci-fi audience, but like I say, it's very hard to tell. Because some early on the episode, there were bits that even made me think about Rent-A-Ghost. There's this business with the car that they sort of drive, the car driving itself, and policemen sort of taking as it goes past. That's the eating, and the aliens eat grass. That's kind of very kind of sort of kids comedy.
Well, yeah, because there were times, because we noticed that because Adam and Shem break into a farmhouse to get some food, and the girl comes out and goes, "I'm telling my mum," and they're like, "Oh, run!" And this happens quite a few times. They behave like schoolboys. The amount of times they say Flavia or stumble across her or whatever, and she goes, "Adam, you came for me," and Adam's like, "No, I didn't. It was Shem," and he runs off like a little schoolboy, and then Shem looks a bit confused and then goes, "Oh," and runs off after Adam. And it's like that happens so many times. I'm also wondering because not only did Star Maidens have a novelization based on it released, it also had an annual which seems to be aimed at children.
And most of the merchandise that they did release did seem quite sort of child. There was some jigsaws.
Oh, there was even as well.
Dolls. This is something I only just kind of discovered. I mean, they're basically just kind of generic fashion dolls.
Yeah.
Dressed in slightly futuristic clothes. But so that all suggests they were aiming for perhaps more of a sort of a Gerry Anderson audience, younger audience.
In some respects, the British probably had the right idea of keeping the tone light, in that had the series taken itself seriously, it might actually have been really rather obnoxious. As frivolous as it is actually kind of fun. Yeah, if it was taking itself seriously, that fun element would disappear.
Yeah, I was reading. It was the SFX article that I mentioned. It was saying, what was it? Ian Warren, who was an executive, said he wanted it to be tongue in cheek, and he was tired of. He said he felt people were tired of po-faced characters in serious sci-fi.
Anyway, I can sort of see what he meant, because in 1976, Star Wars is still. In fact, it could well have been being made round at Elstree at this time, sort of like, and I was thinking about this actually, that possibly on the ground in the studio, probably the actors didn't feel there was that much difference between what Star Maidens or Star Wars, sort of like when it came to just filming in the studio.
It's contemporary with Space 1999, isn't it? Well, you want po-faced. I'm known for not being much of a fan of Space 1999. I find it very. I find it somewhat turgid, to be completely honest, because it takes itself seriously quite often. And and strangely, they do have a similar look and feel, but then they share the same production designer, don't they?
More than that, the production designer, set dresser, sound editor, film editor, the SFX guy, they even filmed in the same studios and reused some of the same props.
Yeah, I recognise some of the props, actually. And it has to be said, I prefer to watch Star Maidens than I would Space 1999. In fact, I'd have preferred another season of Star Maidens to another season of Space 1999. That's not going to be a popular opinion with the audience.
I've not seen Space 99. I'd like to see it.
No, you don't.
Oh, it's very. We might talk about Space 1999 in another show. I've got a soft spot for it. It can be. I mean, yes, it can be terribly pompous, and it has this reputation that it's got a serious season and a silly season. And to my mind, the serious season is pretty silly as well. Yes, it's just that nobody's smiling.
It is curious, though, that they both have also similar background stories. I mean, you've got the moon being blasted out of orbit and becoming a rogue object in Space 99, and you've got Medusa being blasted out of orbit and becoming a rogue object in Star Maiden. So I don't know. Was rogue planets a popular idea at the time?
It's possible. I mean, that idea of the rogue planet coming into our solar system just seemed to reoccur in science fiction. Even leaving aside the obvious physics of the situation, but this idea of a planet appearing in our solar system does seem to keep reoccurring. But that's I think the other thing that really strikes you when you start watching the show is how much it does look like Space 1999 because of Keith Wilson being the production designer. So certainly on Medusa, a lot of the computer panels and the like have that very similar look. If you've not seen Space 1999, there's no point us they're a bit hard to describe quickly on a podcast, but it's actually
handmade, I think is the way I'd describe it.
It's actually quite a good look. I don't blame him in a way for sticking with the design. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the filmmakers had said, "Oh, can we have a bit more of what you did for Space 1999? Some more designs like that." Although, unfortunately, because the series is made on 60mm film as opposed to 35mm, there's a certain air of cheapness inevitably over the whole proceedings, so it never looks as good quite as Space 1999 could because of that. And unfortunately, because it's on 60mm, it also gives it something of the look of a British sex comedy as well. As I feel you see, and especially because you've got all the Medusian women in all this kind of sexy disco gear that they're wearing.
I was just going to say sparkly jewellery and stuff on the faces and that.
They are very into their sequins on Medusa. But like I say, it's unfortunate, the 60mm, and also it makes the model effects look worse as well. I mean, they're not bad. They're not up to the standard. There's nothing as iconic as the Eagles that Space 1999 has.
Yeah, it's I feel they feel more hurried, but there is definitely some talent behind the scenes on the effects. It's not done incompetently, but some of it just feels hurried. They had a lot to get through in a short amount of time, kind of thing.
Yeah, the Medusan city looks great until you look at the windows. Just don't look up at the windows.
Don't look, because I thought it was at first. I thought it was just like a sort of artistic pattern they had, and then I looked when we saw it closer. It's like, oh, they're supposed to be tower blocks. Oh dear.
Yeah. Other than that, it does look great. Medusa.
It looked quite good as an artistic pattern. They should have just kept that.
Yeah, certainly. I felt that Medusa, if that had been a planet of the week that Space 1999 was visiting, it certainly would have passed muster, I think. That's actually the planet. Just on a side effect, the fact that the planet is called Medusa rather than Athena or Aphrodite, I think. Already, we're getting negative connotations about this this female society.
Well, yeah, I mean, the gender politics in the show is very, very mixed because employing what we call the backlash discourse, where women, which basically says women shouldn't be given power, women are dangerous with power, and you see this in some episodes, the way Octavia is represented. We see it in episodes with the feminists who are shown as dangerously incompetent when handling space-age guns. And again, there's this tendency with this backlash discourse to present, again, strong characters like Octavia as almost ball breakers. So you had a lot of this in the 70s and 80s where they'd have these very scary women who basically don't like men, and it's always this message saying, feminism is bad for women and it's going to ruin you. And it comes out in other ways as well, such as particularly the last episode where the Medusan women are just absolutely freaking out when the enemy show up and they just can't do anything. They're just like, no, we have to run away. And it's the men who have to, save the day. So you've got all that stuff, but then you've got even more complicated stuff going on in the Perfect Couple episode where bizarrely Adam and Flavia decide to move into a house together. And first of all, Adam's like, oh no, women belong in the kitchen, and Flavia's like, oh, that sucks. And then suddenly they decide, screw it, we're going to go with our old roles on Medusa. And you're thinking, well, what's the point in that when you escaped Medusa? And Adam's holding Tupperware parties with the neighbourhood women, and Flavia's going off to work, and then they're not happy about that either. And then it all goes to pieces anyway because the extreme feminists show up, and again, the Adam and Shem run off like naughty schoolboys. And you see, feminists handle quite badly in British sci-fi at the time. In Doctor Who, for example, in the Time Monster, you've got this feminist character who's always like, oh, men. And Sarah Jane's like that a bit at first in Time Warrior, but they turn her down a bit on that. I think she's not so bad by Monster Paladin.
It's the same problem again.
Men, right?
Written by men, yeah. And
might not really get feminism.
Probably didn't know a damn thing about it, to be honest. I mean, it's as I said earlier, the show is better when it stays away from the gender politics. Actually, when you do look into the Medusan society, it is perplexing. I mean, there's a degree of misandry on display by the Medusans in how they treat their males, but there's a lack of corresponding misogyny from the humans that we meet. So you're not really getting the parallels. So I'm not sure what they're trying to say.
Well, it's also at the first episode, you hear Adam having a moan going, oh, what are we all left to do as men? We've got to look after the children. What children? There's no children ever in this show.
You never meet one.
You never see any children. And why? And to say, they keep saying, oh, the men are all domestics, yet somehow they can handle fly a spaceship, and they can work as mechanics and hack police cars. And
to point out that Shem is
a mechanic,
especially privileged amongst males. It says that.
I don't get that bit.
His abilities are somewhat unusual. But I mean, a lot of the men on Medusa are depicted, at least, as almost being treated as slaves and objects. But at the same time, we're being told in all these plots that the Medusans have this advanced society, this advanced system compared to Earth, and they became this advanced when women replaced the men as leaders. But the major problem is that the show portrays Medusan society as arrogant, blinkered, closed-minded, and riven by political rivalry. I mean, what's supposed to be better here?
Yeah.
Again, it just undermines any parallels they are trying to draw that might mean anything. Well,
also another thing is, which we forgot about, is they're controlling the men through some kind of brainwashing.
Yeah.
Because they do that in the Nightmare canon. They're able to manipulate the men so they break down and go, oh, please, I'm sorry, take me back. I won't do it again. And that's not really a parallel to Earth, because we don't have those kind of devices here, like man finders and other such.
I was going to say, I think with the Medusan Society, this is probably me reading into stuff, that in some ways they're a society in decline, in that they've got all this technology, but do you get the impression that the Medusan women don't really know how it works? They don't have they're just using it. And it's at the very start of the series, we get that voiceover saying how there was a golden age before their planet started, before the comet comes along, and I have this feeling that all this technology was sort of created, indeed could be created by women in this golden age, and now it's a bit like decadent Rome. In a sense, so we've got all now the women, they're using it and they think of themselves as very technologically sophisticated, but a lot of them don't actually know how this technology really works.
That would make a lot of sense if the series, actually drew from that. But there is. I mean, it has to be a society under extreme stress simply because they've had to live underground in these city-sized bunkers for thousands of years. I suppose it's going to do something to. But yes, they do seem like they've gone into a sort of almost, I don't know, Gormenghast-like stasis of nothing much ever changing. So contact with planets like Earth becomes especially dangerous to them.
Well, they wouldn't listen when Rudi and Liz were trying to warn them about the environmental disaster happening on the surface.
They're very complacent there.
Yeah. They're like, well, this computer says nothing's wrong, so, everything's cool and you're wrong.
Classic example is their police force, which is made up of women in a rather impractical halter tops and hot pants uniform and high heel boots.
It's a bizarre choice of costuming, that.
That's right, yeah, and the coloured visors and it it looks like they've I don't know, like they've come off an anime or something.
we were talking about this contrast in the sexism of the two cultures. In some ways, I think it's a bit of a, again, it's that male point of view, in that whereas the women on Medusa are always explicitly saying, "Oh, men are so useless and women are superior," and whereas on Earth, the men don't say that because they just assume it. They don't need to go around saying that they think women are inferior and just stick to certain roles because, they just know it. And so there's a kind of subtle sexism going on Earth.
That's it. There's no, for the Medusan characters, there's very little for them to sort of witness and be, have their views transformed by. So if anything, I would say it gives the sexism, but is surely rife on 1970s Earth, pretty much a free pass for most of the show. There's a couple of moments where you get the odd lech, but other than that, it's the general powerlessness of women is just not touched on at all. When they are dealing with like Madame Flavia and Octavia, they are actually being fairly obsequious to them. They're not just talking down to them saying, "Right here, love, this is what we're gonna do." They are actually trying to be diplomatic with them. So again, you don't get the sense when they're dealing with the Medusans either.
So there is that unevenness in there. So it doesn't really work well as satire, apart from, to some extent, the episode you were talking about earlier, Rebecca, the
perfect couple.
Because in that one, I thought that worked quite well in that they start off trying to live like an ideal human couple with what they've learned from, it seems, magazines and whatnot. Yeah, and they say, "Oh no, actually, we're a lot happier with Adam staying in at home and Flavia going to work." And they actually, what it should be saying, there's nothing essentially wrong with Adam wanting to be a house husband. It's where the problem is when he's forced into, and every other man is kind of forced into that role.
Again, they don't take the time to in most of the show to push for those parallels for people to join the dots.
Yeah, and I mean the perfect couple. How long a period of time is that episode set over? Because you just, again, you're watching it, it feels like it's all happened in one day almost, but it can't be. It must have been
how badly undermined is it by the B plot?
Well, with the feminists, that really. Because I mean, I was reading this academic paper by Sharon Sharp from 2008, and she really focuses in on that episode and says, it's quite, complicated and contradictory. And she suggests the critique is blunted by the humour. And she says on one side it's it's critiquing gender roles and the patriarchy, like you said, about the gender roles and choice. But then at the same time, it can shore up reactionary attitudes towards feminism and essentializing technology, like with the joke about temperamental female weapons.
And it's a shame because it probably has, on one level, it has some of very grown-some humour in that it's supposed to be hilarious that Adam is sort of holding tea parties and talking, and that he's got a recipe. Oh, it's my father's recipe, he says, for this cake. And there was, however, probably the only joke I really thought, oh, that worked. However, because it's when they go to the pub and they're trying to fit in, and Flavia starts telling this dirty joke, and Adam says, "No, it's the men who tell the jokes. You go over there with the women." So she goes over with the women and starts telling the joke again, and that quite tickled me. I think that's definitely was the joke that worked amongst it all.
Yeah, there's another bit with Flavia as well, because played with my expectations. It's the one where what were they? Some rival politicians or from another country where they're trying to kidnap her. And I thought, oh, here we go, that typical old trope of the woman being seduced by the man and waking up in shackles. You get that in things like Wonder Woman. So they kidnap her, but then they were going to drug her, but then she switches the drugs around. So that undermined that trope, which I quite liked. But then it still required Adam to save her in the end. It was very strange. Again, you're getting all this muddling and no coherent message overall, so you're never quite sure what the show's trying to tell us.
Well, Flavia is... she's the most contradictory character for a lot of it, I find. I mean, she's this aristocratic politician. She's no fool, but obviously she dotes on Adam, even if neither of them will admit it to each other. They dote on each other, really. And certainly enough to chase him off to Earth when he escapes. But she always seems to be working towards a goal that suits her. She doesn't seem to be... She doesn't seem to work in the interest of Medusa or of Earth. It very much seems to be about Earth. It does mean each week she seems to have a very different agenda.
That's right. Some in one episode she's kind of, oh, those boys, and sort of like, and in the other episode she's like, they must be captured immediately.
So I don't. I never did get to the bottom of her character.
No, and so many of those episodes usually ended with Adam and Shem running off, and you're like, wait, they're running off again? I thought we'd moved on from this.
Yeah, happy homemaker one week, bitchy dictator the next.
Perhaps a little bit more successful to some extent. Shem also gets a little bit of a story later on in the episode Hideout, where he's taken in by a woman who has apparently just come off an unhappy love affair. Although there is something, and my partner Tina pointed this out, there is something slightly stalkerish about the woman who takes him in. Particularly, notice, look at the photos of her supposed boyfriend that she's just broken up with, and they're always of him on his own, wearing a hat and coat. And it's like... She's been photographing him from afar, you suspect. And then later on, she put the picture of Shem on the mantelpiece, and it's been cut out from the newspaper. It's just something just a bit odd about her.
Yeah, that is odd.
Not a bad episode, all told, actually, that one. But again, it's like, it's just not referred back to or anything like that afterwards, but then there is only a couple of episodes after it, isn't
there? Yeah, it is one of the last episodes. Because there's quite a few episodes after Nightmare Canon where you see him fixing up the ship and going, we're going back now, Adam. This has all gone wrong. We've been very silly. Let's go back. And then he runs off with Adam anyway, when he's like, no, I don't love you, Flavia. Run away.
He isn't entirely there by choice anyway, because Adam kind of commandeers him along with the ship.
Yeah.
to a degree at the beginning. So I guess he is
he's
in two minds.
Yeah. I think he's very easily led.
Yes.
He's one of those fairly submissive characters. He seems to be, whoever's the strongest personality in the room, he seems to tend to follow their lead.
Yeah.
And we've not actually mentioned yet, and perhaps worth a little mention of President Clara, played by Dawn Adams, who was quite a well-known film star in British films back in the 40s and 50s. And it's actually not a bad performance. I mean, the characterization again is all over the place about how she goes. Sometimes she's very smart, sometimes she's quite dim. But at least Dawn Adams is as regal as someone who's wearing a headdress made entirely of sequins can look.
And they're trying to, I don't know, give Liz a chance to integrate into Medusan society.
In Liz, and it's interesting. I did wonder at first it was going to be that Liz was going to become seduced in some way by the Medusan lifestyle, especially because she's treated very well, whereas Rudi, of course, is immediately turned into a slave, and he gets no respect from anybody, whereas she just gets a nicer apartment and a lot more freedom.
I don't think it's like that for Liz, though. I feel that she's not as locked down as Rudi is, but I think she finds that life on Medusa for her personally is there's a lot of restrictions on her freedom. She has to put up with the paranoia of everyone around her. And she really chafes against these like that strict conformist doctrine that, you know, the Medusan women all seem to live by. I mean, you know, she's well aware she's still a prisoner. She might be in fancier clothes in a fancier apartment, but she's every much as under lock and key as Rudi is.
She gets bugged at times, doesn't she? And she that weird machine to find out if she fancies a bloke or not. Yeah. That was weird.
That was one of the weirdest
parts. Very strange sequence.
I can't help feeling that's, if it was meant to be funny, it doesn't work. It's just weird and creepy. That sequence.
That's an episode where Octavia is also behaving way out of character.
Because it was like she was becoming obsessive with everything Liz was doing, and it was just very strange because she wasn't like that in other episodes. So we're talking about the sets of the show, and I really like the theme tune. It's a very catchy theme tune. But why in the opening titles did they have to show the world's ugliest car every episode? That ugly 70s car.
I'm glad you mentioned the theme music, because yes, I was going to raise that. It's a nice bit of music. I think the only trouble is it's a bit generic. It could have equally been the theme of a policeman show or even a quiz show, for that matter.
It's so 70s.
Yeah, it's very 70s. It is a bit of an earworm though. That is very 70s. I was just going to say, speaking of the 70s, the show was very white again.
Definitely.
There's no diversity. There's certainly no diversity on Medusa, and as we've said before, no children.
And that's part of that. They haven't really fought out Medusan society much at all, because I was quite interested in that element of it. How are children raised on this planet? The ugly car you mentioned, it is a hideous brown, fawn-coloured. I meant to try and look up what.
Yeah, I'm not sure what make it was. I think, but it looks like it was designed by Playmobil or something. But I guess that's the aesthetic of the era. But it's not the only. The other cars they feature are no nicer to look at. I mean, and you got the paint jobs on them are like, you've got stomach trouble brown, casset green. It's just, and they're so proud of that car, that estate car. They put it in the closing credits every week,
and the opening titles every week. Yeah. So no, not the car. It's the professor's car, isn't it?
Yeah.
Who's the only character we haven't really talked about, but I can't really say I've got much to say about him. Professor Evans.
Yeah, not really.
There's not a lot to know. Professor Evans never really registers, really. I mean, although he's played by a veteran character actor, Derek Farr, he's not really given any interesting quirks. So he just kind of looks worried all the time. He's just there looking concerned in all scenes. So, although he has the rare distinction in that he's one of the few characters who does actually travel between Earth and Medusa.
Yeah.
Mentioning the ugly car. Even by the standards of other 70s shows, there's something particularly ugly about England in this. This is the really naff 70s on show.
We've talked about the theme music, with the light orchestra, theme. You've got the blocky poster fonts for the credits. It's the sets of this drowning sea of beige and cream. You've got random acrylic props everywhere. You've got furnishings clad with pleather. You've got elaborate polyester costumes on everyone. All that bulky 1970s tech of switches and relays and monstrous computer banks with their own disco light show. And of course, the sort of invisible line between drama and high camp. It really is it's worth watching an episode just for that experience, really.
One thing was mentioned in the Gareth Thomas interview. He mentioned that the housing estate from The Perfect Couple was completely empty. In fact, they were still building it at the time, and the builders were not happy with the crew being there. They wanted them to get off, and I think that explains why the housing estate had such a strange sterile look. And that was something we didn't mention. There were scenes where all the men and Flavia would leave the house at the exact same time, all the houses in the street at the exact same time, and drive off in their cars at the exact same time, while the housewives waved goodbye, and it was really weird.
It is weird. I kind of took that as just a kind of a stylistic touch, that to kind of show the conformity, rather than a sort of sinister Stepford wife sort of element.
Well, the thing is, rather than saying it's sinister, I mean it was more, again, it's kind of trying to critique the conformity thing by making it look ridiculous.
Or was it just an idea of the director at the time who just thought, oh, that'd be quite fun to do? It's hard to tell.
Yeah.
The thing with Star Maidens is it does demonstrate why other sci-fis either stay away from the gender plot, or when they do the gender plot, it just doesn't work. It's just there isn't much mileage in it at the end of the day. I mean, let's face it, that Blake 7 episode is pants.
Oh yeah, I was going to phrase that as a question. Has there ever been a good sci-fi episode? About a woman, because I can't think of one.
I'm racking my brains. I mean, the best I can come up with is probably Happiness Patrol. At least I can believe in that society.
I do believe in that society. I mean, maybe, yeah. I mean, probably because the theme for the feminine part is sort of incidental. Really,
yes,
that's not what the story's about.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's only that comment between the guards who say something about, oh, the women get all the best gear.
Yeah, women get all the best guns. But
so yeah, that probably is the way of doing it. In a way, is doing it but without drawing attention to it.
Oh, there's the Asari in Mass Effect. Well, that's single race.
That was something else I was going to mention if we wanted to move into games. The Asari, that's quite a well-realised matriarchal society, but that kind of works because the Asari are all female anyway. They don't have any concept of gender politics.
That's another way of doing it. In fact, those books I was talking about earlier, in Venus Plus X, it's a future where everyone is a hermaphrodite, but basically they're sort of male hermaphrodites. So everyone is essentially male, but they've got wombs as well in that one. So that's one approach, which is where you make it a single sex society, essentially.
Like in Wonder Woman on Themyscira, which funnily was originally called Paradise Island, when people were allowed to set foot on.
All very interesting. Would you like to go into some final thoughts on Star Maidens?
I think it's a very contradictory and muddled show, because there isn't, like we said before, there's no single hand at the tiller. There's no overarching, I guess, person eye cast over the show. So it's like everyone's doing their own thing, and with different agendas, different goals, different ways of thinking about things and approaching it. So it all becomes a bit of a strange mishmash muddle.
It's certainly not as bad as its reputation suggests. Nowhere near as bad. In fact, it's actually quite watchable for the most part, even if it's not what you'd call good. I mean, it ranges from farcical to being actually almost competent sci-fi. But it's difficult to categorize, and I think that is its biggest problem. They didn't seem to quite know why they were making it or who they were making it for, and it has languished simply because it's not memorable, but it doesn't sit on any particular shelf.
No, and in Sharon Sharp's article, she talks about it, saying it's been overlooked very much by academics, but also fandom. And she says, in general, especially in academia, you've got this snobbery towards television sci-fi, where there's a tendency to favour literature sci-fi or film sci-fi. And even more so, there's a snobbery towards British products, but in this case, even more so, because it's ITV, so BBC is seen as serious sci-fi, whereas ITV is dismissed as popular, trivial and commercial. So it's like a triple blow. It's on television, it's British, and it's ITV. And all that's stacking up against it.
Yeah, I think there is a true, and in fact, in that article which you sent me to read, I think she also makes there's possibly a bit of sexism going on there in that it's called Star Maidens. You know, if it was called Star Lords.
Again, you get it in things like talking about nostalgic shows, animation. Lots of people talking about Transformers and Turtles, but less stuff aimed at girls.
Trouble is, though, Star Maidens doesn't even seem to be aimed at girls.
No, it doesn't seem to know who it's in.
True. I think it is a series that has unexplored possibilities that you wish they had. I mean, a good one is the influence. We never. It is a bit one way in that we have the humans trying to get the Medusians to come around to our way of thinking. There's no sense. It might have been interesting, for example, if knowledge of this matriarchal society, this alien planet, had begun to affect Earth. You know,
it did with the feminist groups because they got very excited and invited Flavia for a talk, and they just seemed to idolize Flavia.
What I thought from watching Star Maidens is there's plenty of well, it feels like there's plenty of episodes. It's probably like 2 or 3 where you've got Rudi, Liz, or Professor Evans saving the day, and so Earth people having a direct effect on Medusan society. There's nothing in reverse. There's no point where Flavia or Flavia or Adam and Shem step in and save Earth from a disaster of some sort, or solve something that causes international acclaim, or praise for the Medusan people. What is kind of weird, and it's very British and very 70s actually, is that a lot of people's attitudes to them being extraterrestrial seems to be, oh, you're an alien, oh right, okay. The fact that they've got extraterrestrial visitors walking among them.
Well, no, you got that guy who phones up the police, isn't it, and dobs him in going, hey, that alien's down the street. Go nab him.
Yeah, it's true that. And initially, I think early on, there's some lip service to, we've got to keep this undercover. We don't want to cause panic. And then, by halfway through the series, it's being just casually announced on the news, that there are 2 aliens on the loose. In fact, and it's not even the lead story, I seem to remember. It just kind of comes halfway through the news.
Yeah, and it got used to the idea of having alien visitors very quickly.
Yeah.
But we really needed episodes where the Medusans have a direct effect on human culture, so there can be some feeling of exchange, rather than it being there. It just feels like then there's no calling out of the attitudes of Earth society. But this is probably because Rebecca could probably explain this better than me, but in 1970s Britain, there's still quite a lot of fairly hefty sexism around, but I suspect the people writing and directing this, because they're in that culture, they probably don't see it. So they have nothing to particularly write about to, attack or expose, because they're probably not, probably not aware of it. So when they do write about the grievances of these radical feminists, all they can do is come up with some grotesque caricature.
Yeah, they have no personal experience of casual sexism or everyday sexism like women at the time would.
Well, not even any catcallers on the street for Flavia to zap, which would have been, I would have thought would have been perfect for their kind of light-hearted approach.
So we end up in the last episode with Flavia. I think Flavia says to Adam, you acted like an Earthman. And that's how we end.
No, I think it would have been better on that last episode, actually, if it had been Flavia who'd ran the ship, juicing women rather than Adam, because Adam is already, contaminated. We know he's already contaminated, so he wasn't really interested. It would have been interesting if a more aggressive attitude or a more Earth-like attitude had been rubbing off on one of the women.
Definitely. I think that was the one thing really missing from the last episode. I wanted the women, have an active part in the conclusion of that story. Even though we've had our own grievances to air about this show, nevertheless, I'm glad I've taken the opportunity to watch it. And I want to thank both of you for watching it along with me for this podcast.
Yeah, despite how much we have moaned, it is actually quite fun, and it's worth the journey.
I'm going to say thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for inviting us on to talk about this, Gareth. It was fun.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. You're welcome.
And thank you for listening. And I'll look forward to us being all together again soon with another sci-fi show. Goodbye for now. Very British Futures has been looking back at Star Maidens with guests Kevin Hiley and Dr. Rebecca Ray. Music by Chatri Aponsiri. Produced by Gareth Preston. If you have any comments, you can tweet them to @FutureVery on Twitter, or leave a comment on my site, garethpreston.blog. We'll be back with The Uninvited.